I'm not going to make a speech, but there are a few letters here that I'm sure all of you would like to hear. They come from almost all over the country. The first one comes from way out in California. It reads, the 2,000 miles between us is filled with the richest blessings possible on this your greatest day, with expectations that you will always be a credit to Ball State and Lambda Chi. I am yours in ZAX, George W. Spaz, Assistant to the Administrative Secretary. The next comes from one of our local Indiana chapters. Congratulations on becoming Lambda Chi's 138th chapter. Yours in ZAX, Zeta Kappa Zeta at Rose Polytechnic Institute. And here's another one from way out in California. Congratulations on your installation and best wishes for the future. Lambda Chi at Fresno State College, Fresno, California. Congratulations and welcome to the bond from the brothers of Upsilon Zeta at Louisiana State University. And finally, congratulations and best wishes as you become a chapter of Lambda Chi Alpha. We are happy to have you with us. Sincerely in ZAX, Houston T. Carnes, Grand High Alpha. I'd like to say here that I'm sure there would have been many more wires had there been an opportunity to send out notices to the chapters that the installation was actually taking place today. However, there just was not the time, unfortunately. As you all know, this was pretty much a hurry-up affair, and there just wasn't the adequate time to send out the notices to the chapters that you were being installed today. I know that all the brothers throughout the country will be pleased and thrilled that you have made it, that you're here, and I hope you'll be hearing from them at some future date. Thank you.
I'm sure that I can speak for President Emmons in words such as this. The administration of this institution has always had a very close feeling towards the social fraternities and sororities on this campus, and I am sure that the very strong tradition that has been carried on for years in the old Navajo fraternity is going to be strengthened and made possibly better under your new connection with the Lambda Chi fraternity. We are certainly very happy that you have come here. You are the second group of the large national fraternity on the campus. We hope that we can contribute to the kind of organization that you are looking forward to. I should say that possibly the administration is not the only one that I'm speaking for. I think that I can speak for the faculty as well as the administration. I'm sure the sponsors would say that I should do so. We're very happy that you are making this affiliation. I'm very happy also to welcome here, on the part of the institution, the dignitaries at this table and the visitors from Butler, Meeco, and other places.
He probably has a great deal of feeling about it. And he's been very helpful in the many, many times that we've been to Indianapolis to talk to him. If we ever get in trouble, we could go down and he would console us, solve our problems for us, and even make us feel good on our way back. I'd like to introduce Cyril F. Ladd, the Administrative Secretary of Lambda Chi Alpha.
Toastmaster, in good shape, this I might say. Our friends from the administration, brothers, sweethearts, of course. When I look at a fair like this, and many people always say the nice thing about it, I always look for unusual aspects of the situation, and I see several. I want to mention them briefly, and then briefly talk a little bit about relations. I promise it'll be very briefly. Some of the unusual things I've noticed about this installation are, I believe that the first installation in the history of Lambda Chi Alpha, where all of the initiates at the installation initiation were alumni. 21 men, good and true, today, making a total, of course, on the charter of 108 charter members. The next first, I should say, is this, that our Ball State group starts a new series, Iota Alpha. We've run through several series now, the alphas, the gammas, the epsilons, the zetas. Now we're starting with iota. Iota alpha zeta. That is also something unusual in this situation. I might say something very unusual, as a matter of fact it's unique in Lambda Chi Alpha, is the fact that this is the first fine educational institution of the Teachers College classification that Lambda Chi Alpha has entered. Our first Teachers College. I might say that we're happy and we're proud that it's Ball State, and we expect to maintain an outstanding chapter here. I might say, to add a little to what Marshall has said, that I hope the chapter here will always feel welcome, drop into the office if it needs help. And of course, I hope it can always say that you can get that help from me, from our alumni secretary, or from the various other secretaries on the administrative staff. We're looking forward to fine relations with our chapter here. That chapter knows already the standards that we desire to maintain, and I'm sure it will maintain them the same as it did in a fine way as Navajo fraternity. I want to reassure, too, our very good friends present from the college administration that from the little conversation I've had with members of the faculty and members of the administration here, some little correspondence, I know that our aims run hand in hand. We're striving after the same goals, to find things that we know will develop something good in our young men, the same as in the young men of all fraternities. So we pledge ourselves to cooperate, the Office of Administration, with the administration at Ball State Teachers College. We're looking forward there too to a very happy relationship. Thank you.
Next, I would like to introduce Judge Lloyd D. Clayton, who will present the charter, and I hope he will say a few words, although I'm a bit worried about what he will say after hearing what happened at Indiana. So, Judge?
Well, President Willard, distinguished guests, Dr. Jamot, included, new brothers of Bond, I'll try to be more discreet than I was down at the seminar. You know, I didn't volunteer for that duty. I was kicked into it. Those rough traveling secretaries. And I might have claimed some relationship with your old Navajo organization. I came very near being initiated into the Navajo tribe at one time, but there was a technical difficulty arose. A part of the ceremony was holding a live rattlesnake. And I was sure I was allergic to that animal life, and I couldn't figure out any way to do that. I do owe you an apology for being late tonight and causing you concern. But as usual, I always overschedule myself, and sometimes things go wrong. But I thought I was taking a very elaborate precaution. For no other reason on earth than the fact that he's an old Navy man, he should have been a good navigator,
did I ask the distinguished Dr. Dean to come up here with me tonight. And so help me, he didn't know where Muncie was. He didn't know where Ball State was. He had no idea where Louisiana Hall was. So he just let me down completely. And didn't seem to worry him a particle either that I was in stress. He just laughed at me. He said it wouldn't really make any difference whether I got here or not. I think it'd go right on without it. I think he's right on that. This is a very pleasant occasion for me, and I certainly appreciate this opportunity of being able to participate in it. Respect is clear beyond my just desserts. And there's just one thing that disturbs me here, no end, and that's the fact that Dr. DeMont is present. I'm not very well acquainted with the subject. I understand she has taught so long and so well. Perhaps if I had attended her classes some 8 or 10 years, I might be better able to address the distinguished in the language that is supposed to be spoken here tonight. But Doctor, the explanation is I grew up and had my early education in Germany, Du Bois County, Indiana. Or you got these guys present there to another. Anyhow, it's a very fine thing. We did get here. Dr. Dean made some contributions. I think he got out of half of the 18 or 19 filling stations. But he insisted we had to go through Marion, and we had quite a long discussion on that. I was just as sure that we went through Shelby there. And we compromised, and to help me, we hit the town right on the nose. I don't suppose we ever have had as large a group on the charter roll as we're having here tonight. And I know that Dr. Dean is just as happy as I am over being able to be present and participate in this occasion. It's also good to see so many representatives of the faculty and administration here. It means a great deal to the new organization particularly to have their sympathy and their understanding. They've had more troubles and forgotten them than you folks have ever had. You may sometimes think that they lead a life of ease and comfort and everything's a bed of roses, but my guess is it doesn't work that way. And you were right about Duke Fladd carrying heavy burdens. Believe it or not, I understand he was 6'4" before he took this job. So you can see how things are borne down on you. And I don't see how the man does all the multitude of things he does and looks after as many things and keeps them in mind as well as he does. The job of being a fraternity administrative secretary is a tremendous undertaking. 138 staff, nearly 50,000 alumni, and a lot of them are right there in Indianapolis to annoy him and drop in on him when he's very busy, like I probably do frequently, and I'm always ashamed of myself. But I do want to pay tribute to him for the very fine work he has done for Lambda Chi. I think the enviable position we occupy in the fraternity world is due almost entirely to the magnificent organization we have in our central office. I have a lot of other fraternity acquaintances. I've kept active in the work for many years. I know that they all look upon our central organization as being exceedingly efficient and competent. And I take a great deal of pride in it, and I think you boys will too as you become better acquainted with it. Now, I've deviated a great deal in getting these personalities, and my only job, Duke said, now for heaven's sake, don't talk over half an hour. And I'm trying to stand to that. But I don't know of anything that's giving me any more pleasure than just this occasion of being able to present the charter to this fine group and to the very fine young man you have selected for your president. So now, without any further ado or ceremony, By authority is vested in me for the Grand High Zeta of Lambda Chi Alpha, I now send to you with my heartiest congratulations the chapter charter for your new organization, and with it my very kindest regards and my sincerest best wishes.
Thank you, Judge. I know that you also carry a great deal of responsibility since he is the past Grand High Alpha and the past national president. And he evidently had quite a bit of responsibility in his job. And I think we are indeed fortunate he did arrive and that nothing had happened. And we're very, very thankful that you could be here tonight, Judge. Thank you again. On behalf of the members, I would like to thank the Grand High Zeta, the national officers, and everybody that has put in a great deal of work toward obtaining this charter. I hope that everything will go as well as it has, and we will always be a credit to Lambda Chi Alpha. Well, as I said this afternoon, we've got to have a brass. So, we have it. We have Judge Clayton, and we also have our National Vice President, Tozer Brown. Here's another man that carries a lot of responsibility. In fact, he carries so much that he can't ride or drive or come on a train. He's got to fly from place to place. And I guess he's going to leave at 5:45 in the morning to fly back. So we are very unfortunate tonight in having him speak to us. We're very fortunate to have him this afternoon to preside over the ritualistic presentation. And I hope, though, that we weren't a disappointment to you, and that we will always be a credit to Lambda Chi, and also a furtherance to the Navajo fraternity. I know we have a lot of alums here, and without their work, this would not have been possible. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce Tozer Brown, National Vice President. Tozer?
Thank you, Brother Toastmaster. Members and friends of Lambda Chi, you will appreciate, of course, that I am at a distinct disadvantage. Anyone presuming to talk after Judge Clayton is indeed very presumptuous. The judge, in his inimitable Hoosier style, and I've never seen it to fail, can, in a very few words, regale the audience and still leave a heartfelt, sincere message. An installation is a very inspiring thing to me. It's been my good fortune to see many of them, to have participated in many of them. And one of the most inspiring things, it seems to me, is that it attracts and keeps the interest of men like Judge Clayton. It might be added to what has already been said that he is the number one man of his chapter at the University of Indiana. Now, Lloyd wouldn't want me to tell you how many years ago that was, but it goes back for several decades, and believe me, Lambda Chi Alpha today has a position in the fraternity world, and we believe an enviable one, because of men like Judge Clayton. Men who've been willing to give of themselves, who have sought to help others, not for personal gain, because the judge hasn't had any personal gain except the greatest of all rewards, and that is satisfaction and pride and joy in helping others. And his life has certainly been filled with that type of fraternalism. Now tonight we have a variety of men and one woman present. So a fraternity to us, individually, may mean different things, various things. And I thought tonight I'd speak with you briefly on the simple subject of what is a fraternity. And I'd like to approach it from the standpoint of a pledge and an active and an alumnus. Because I think the fraternity to those three groups is something different. And I believe we understand a fraternity better if we discuss it in those terms, we try to understand it in those ways, and come closer to appreciating how we will regard our fraternity in later years, or looking back, how do the younger men regard it. Let's take the pledge first. I believe a pledge, new in the fraternity, of course, looks upon a fraternity first as an association. That's what has attracted him. He meets a group of congenial men. He sees in that group men of varied interests, men of varied capabilities. He doesn't know much about it. He wants to learn about it. So his first impression of a fraternity is that it is a close association of men, and that appeals to him. Secondly, to a pledge, he finds that a fraternity is an environment. Now that's of great importance, not only to the fraternity, but to the college administration, and to the community, and to the public at large. Because in these very formative years in college, your fraternity is going to be a very distinct part of your environment. It's going to affect your attitude. It's going to affect your interest. It's going to affect your loyalty. And all of us, young and old, recognize the importance of such an environment. It can be a tremendous force for good, and unfortunately, it can be a force that is not constructive, that is not good. But in any event, I say to you, to a pledge, a fraternity is an environment from the very first day that he becomes affiliated with that group. And finally, it seems to me that to a pledge, the fraternity is an opportunity. Shortly after he affiliates, he begins to see that in addition to a pleasant association, in addition to an environment, here is a chance to improve himself, to develop, to broaden his social contacts, to increase his interest and participation in activities, to improve his scholarship, to improve the relations with other students and with the college administration. And he sees the fraternity, as he learns more about it, in a somewhat different light than the first day that he came into it, because at that point it was just an attractive association. Now I think that what I have just said is about as far as the thinking of a pledge goes. He has an association, he becomes a part of an environment, and he begins to realize that it's an opportunity for him. Now let's look at the active member. He has progressed considerably in his knowledge of the fraternity. He's been with it for some months or years. He understands it. He's learned something about it. What is a fraternity to him? First of all, I think it's a challenge. He sees the opportunity, and the great opportunity, to make of himself a better man. He is confronted in many ways by association, by the teachings of the fraternity, by the contacts within and outside of the group, that here is indeed a real challenge to him to be a better man, to be a better citizen, to be a better scholar, to be a more varied and active, interested, successful collegian. And continuously the fraternity keeps before him ideals, standards, inspiration, all of which is given to him and held before him in the hope that he will accept the challenge, that he will take hold of it, that he will make a better man of himself. And the active member begins to see that a fraternity is something that is pushing him and pulling him and helping him forward. I think, second, that an active regards his fraternity as a source of help specifically. It takes perhaps some time to begin to realize the value of being a part of an active, energetic, responsible group of men. He soon learns that this chapter or any other chapter will not long exist unless there is a willingness to take hold of responsibility and get the job done. He soon learns that the bills have to be paid, that the papers have to be published, that the reports have to be issued, that the meetings have to be well conducted and planned, that the scholarship must be creditable, and if a house is operated, the multitude of factors about operating the house, the kitchen, the dining hall, the stewardship, and in all of these complex ways, he sees and feels and knows that it's a source of help to him, that without the fraternity he would never have had the opportunity for that intimate, day-to-day contact and work and helping one another that contributes so much in the background of all of us. Because it is a type of experience that, despite all the educational institutions can and do give us, they can't hope to duplicate it, because it is on an individual, small group, intimate, personal basis. I think, again, the active regards his fraternity as an object of respect, not just because he belongs, not just because he wears the badge, because respect, in the sense in which I mean it at least, isn't blind respect, not just blind devotion, that you're loyal to Lambda Chi because you are a Lambda Chi, but the kind of loyalty and devotion and understanding we expect of you is based on knowledge, education, belief. We feel you don't really respect something, or you are not really devoted to something if you don't know it, if you haven't studied it, if you haven't truly become a part of it. And that's why we expect the active, in time, to really respect the fraternity for what it is, and what it stands for, and what it believes in, and what it does. And that type of respect and devotion comes from knowledge and becoming a part of the organization, not just joining it. Then we come to the alumnus. What does the fraternity mean to him? What is a fraternity as far as he's concerned? I think we'd all agree that first, the fraternity to an alumnus is a tradition. It's a tradition. It's something that he looks back to with mellowness, with a sense of enjoyment and pride. And that's all a constructive part of a man's being. Tradition, we believe, has a great and good place in the lives of all men, and particularly the alumni. We want to so conduct our fraternity and our chapters that that tradition will be rich and meaningful and beneficial, because throughout life, those things which we remember with dignity and enjoyment and feeling are the things which continue to inspire us and urge us forward. And we believe that to an alumnus, his fraternity is a tradition, a sound, constructive tradition. We think again that to an alumnus, his fraternity is a source of pride. And again I say, not because he was a member, not because he was initiated, but because he was and is a part of a growing, developing, constructive fraternity. The world is pretty full of business, professional, social, religious, philosophical, any type you may mention. Many of them are good. Many of them serve a purpose. But many do not have a continuing purpose. We believe that the average alumnus is proud of Lambda Chi Alpha because it is a force for good and a continuing organization with a purpose. And that purpose is just to make each of us and all of us better because of our affiliation, better because we were members, not just better because we wore a certain badge. Because in this final analysis, the particular badge you wear as such means nothing. But we want the alumnus to be proud of Lambda Chi Alpha because it is a purposeful, meaningful organization. And finally, we think an alumnus will regard and should regard his fraternity as an opportunity for service. As the fraternity grows, more and more assistance is needed from alumni, not financial. In some cases, alumni may be able to help a local situation financially. But that's not the type of assistance that the younger men need from the older men. They need counseling, mutual helpfulness. Man has said just what the fraternity is. Now it happens that the man whose statement I'm going to read very briefly was not a member of Lambda Chi Alpha. But in a sense he was. He was a member of Lambda Chi and Theta Chi and Sigma Chi and all of the fraternities. Because this man, through his writings, his talks, and his associations, left a deep impression upon fraternities generally. Alvin Duer died a few years ago, unfortunately, but he left many good things said and written. And here is what Dr. Duer said when he was asked, well, what is a fraternity? He said, is it the alumni, the organization which holds us together, or the undergraduates? It is all of these, yet none of them. For the fraternity is a spirit of brotherly service which gathers its members only to inspire them and to help them to a way of thinking and of living which otherwise they might not achieve. If this spirit does not persist after your members leave the chapter house, they had no fraternity while they were there. If your organization is not more than an instrumentality for the aggrandizement of self, rather than for the service of its young members, it directs no fraternity. If your undergraduates are not a group imbued with responsibility for each other, they have sold the birthright of fraternity men. And I say to you, I hope that this chapter will always be a source of help to its young men and not an instrumentality for the aggrandizement of self. And in expressing that hope, I equally express the belief, the sincere belief, that this chapter will join all of the others in being a force for good on this campus and a credit to the international fraternity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I'm sure a lot of us wish we could speak as you do. He speaks from a very few notes, but he speaks from his heart, and that's what counts. We're very fortunate to have you with us tonight, and we certainly appreciate it. I think now that with one announcement, the pledges should meet with Richard Ferris in the back of the room following the banquet. And I'll ask Bill Carter to lead us in a few songs which will conclude the installation banquet. Bill?
I think that probably to start off with, most of us know this, the rest of us can sing along, if you don't, is we're all good fellows. Thank you. And that will be good.
I want to thank all of you for coming. I hope you've had an enjoyable time as the rest of us have. Thank you and good night.
Because there's 3 or 4 pieces of philosophy in there, where Burns really tells you how to live. For all of his own reckless career, he was nevertheless a philosopher. He says this about pleasures. But pleasures are like poppies spread. You seize the flower, the bloom is shed. Or like the snow falls in the river, a moment white, then melts forever. Or like the Borealis race that flips ere you can point their place. Or like the rainbow's lovely form, he vanishes amid the storm. And that is almost as true as Bible. So when you read Tam O'Shanter, do not read it with the view in mind of going out and drinking some reaming swats, but read it for the purpose of taking home to yourselves the philosophy of the great poet of Scotland, the philosophy of hard luck, Robert Burns. Now, you want to ask me some questions about how I happened to write Bates House, or what there is in it, or the difficulties I had with the matter of getting a publisher or anything of that kind. I sometimes think these questions and answer programs do us a little more good than for one to just stand here before you and spout off at random. So a question, please. Yes, sir. Well, I acquired my inspiration for Bates House because I was raised in an atmosphere of retold stories of the Civil War. My father was a cavalryman in the Union Army of the Cumberland. And I know that you may be somewhat startled at that. I'm not a young man, but I am a little young-looking to be the son of a Civil War veteran. But my father evidently was a man with young ideas, having lost his first wife immediately sometime following the Civil War. He, in time, married my mother, whom I laid away last year at 90 years of age. He married her at 16 years of age, and he was much her senior, of course. And I happened to be the 4th child by that union. And I've heard him tell of the great battles in which he participated in the Civil War. And he was, whilst he was uneducated so far as book learning was concerned, although he was able to read and write, he was, in my opinion, a very fine speaker. And he could and did describe those battles to me and told me a great deal about the politics connected with Civil War times. Somehow or other, I just got it in my blood and thought that someday I'd write a book about it. And about 5 years ago, I started to write the book. But I was busily engaged, as you know, in the practice of law. I had the cases to look after, the clients to see, complaints to write, motions to file, and the cases to try out in court, and I had to catch as catch can. And there would be times running through a period of months when I could not write at all, because I had participated in some case where the jar and the jolt of it had been so terrific that it seemed to have shaken up my brain cells to such an extent that they would not groove back into the feel for writing. But then again, the feel would come on me and I would write. However, the sentences I wrote of the night looked terrible the next morning. I did most of the writing at night. You have to shut the world out if you're going to write anything. And I would start along about 11 o'clock to get ready for it. And my wife would make her last call at about 1. And then I would put her off for some reason. She'd drop off into a sleep. And then I would write on and on and on until broad daylight. I do not expect to punish myself that way again. I'm writing a book now, or attempting to do so, but I'm going to have to take the law in broken doses if I write the book, because writing is a job. And when you young authors start to write your book, do not do as I have done. Write it after a hard day's work. Get out of bed. Get your mind free and cleared and your stomach warmed up with some good oatmeal, some bacon and eggs, a good cup of coffee, or a glass of milk. Take yourself a little walk to get some good oxygen in your lungs, and then go to your room where you're not bothered and stay there for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 hours. Then you write something worthwhile. I believe that is the only way to write. Bates House was about 900 pages when I first submitted it to the publishers. And I finally got it cut down to about 350 pages. Does that answer the question tolerably well, my friend? All right, I'm ready for another question. Yes, lady? No. Well, I manufacture them as they go along. Of course, you've had to, in your lifetime, see something like them, or hear of something like them. And you create them, you give them birth, and then you sort of start bringing them up, and you're supposed to get the feel of them. And if it's a school teacher, you're supposed to have her talk like a school teacher. And if it's a man in the ditch, we talk like the man in the ditch, and such like. But they are all imaginary in Bates House, except Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis. They actually play parts in Bates House. They do not play out of character, however, because the speeches that they make, the crowds that they face and to whom they talk were real. And I want you to read Bates House at your earliest opportunity for the sake of the positions of those two characters during that great crisis, because I give 2 of their speeches in Bates House to really present the men as they are in the early part of 1861. One is Abraham Lincoln's celebrated Bates House speech that he made from the balcony of the Bates House Hotel in Indianapolis, Indiana, on the 11th of February, 1861. That ground is today occupied, as you know, by the Claypool Hotel. And the speech of Jefferson Davis is the acceptance speech that he made on the 18th day of February, 1861, from the steps of the state capitol in Montgomery, Alabama. Another question? Yes. Well, but that hangs the tail. Now I write in longhand. I've owned many typewriters in my time. I have 4 or 5 up there in the office now. I do not remember having written my name with a typewriter. I do my writing in longhand. And the way I wrote Bates House, I would write some of a night and take it the next morning to my expert stenographer, throw it over to her, have her work it over in type, and then that night I would correct. The next day they would take it back to her, and so on. It seems to be an almost endless chain. Booth Tarkington rewrote 15 times, they say. I believe I rewrote 15 times, too. There's one chapter in Bates House that I think I rewrote 25 times. And I'm not going to be the judge now as to whether it's worth anything or not. You'll have to read it and pass your opinion on it. Now, what was the other part of that question, Mayor? Oh, yes, I have you. It is whether I'm sufficiently swift in my longhand as to keep abreast of my thoughts. Well, now, it frequently happens that when you're writing a line, a thought will cross your mind with such terrific force and impact as that you will hold your thought and hold the thought of your writing that is presently before you long enough to make a note on the new thought that so recently crossed your mind. Now, I've done that time after time in the writing of Bates House. Give another question. Yes, sir. Considerable, yes. I went to the various libraries that were convenient and accessible here to me. Spent considerable time in research. I had a letter from a woman the other day in Birmingham, Alabama. She said, you mentioned Birmingham, Alabama as being a Civil War town. It was not a Civil War town until about 1862, and you have it a Civil War town in 1861. Well, I wrote back. The only way I could get around that was just tell her that I guess an author had, as long as he's writing a novel, had license to call any town in his imagination Birmingham or Pittsburgh, whatever you wanted to call it. So that's how I got by with that. I thanked her, however, for the criticism. And I believe it was timely, because I made research after that. And don't you know, when I was writing Bates House and I put Birmingham in, I thought to myself, I have never in my lifetime, reading any history of the Civil War, met the word Birmingham. That is, as far as it pertains to the city of Alabama. And I believe that she's perfectly right about it. The town did not get started till the Civil War was tolerably well along. I think it was named Forest Center or something like that before it took the name of Birmingham. The novel is written from the southern viewpoint. And I gave it that slant not because I was so much for the South in the position that it took on various matters, because I was certainly opposed to its position on slavery, and I was opposed to Jefferson Davis's point of view on slavery, although I did agree with him, and do now agree with him, that Rome and Athens and Carthage and Babylon went a long way by reason of the slaves they employed. Many, many times in those countries we read where the slaves were the great architects. They were great masters of industry and achievement. But I was favorably impressed with Jefferson Davis's position on states' rights. And that's why I took that position. I believe that while some of our states do not do things just as we would like to have them done, those of us here in Indiana, but nevertheless, if you encroach upon the rights of those states, by an overlording federal system, you'll certainly destroy the democracy that so many Democrats praise and believe in. And it would certainly be to destroy the democracy that Thomas Jefferson believed in. Some of you staunch Republicans, of course, will not like Bakehouse. And some of you Democrats may appreciate it here and there. But I want you to read it at your earliest opportunity, even though you do have to struggle through it. And I must confess that in all probability you will do some struggling. Another question? Yes, young man. Yes. Yes, I took the book to Bob's Merrill when it was 900 pages, and Mrs. York did not let the manuscript warm the table. She just looked through it and picked it back to me. And I did not want to weary in that kind of well-doing, and so I brought it home and rewrote it. And I did not return to Bob Merrill. I then took the manuscript down to New York and left it with a publisher, and he rejected it. So I happened down to New York again trying the case, and I brought it home and rewrote it. And I finally handed it to Greenberg, the publisher, and he accepted it. And pays a royalty on the $3 seller of 30 cents. And I don't know how rich I'll get by reason of my efforts. I haven't had my royalty check yet. It will not come in until the 30th of this month. I do not know whether it will be $10 or $500. Because those publishers do not do much talking with their authors. They do not with me, at least. They receive me and take me out to dinner when I go down there, and that's about all. They're business people. They have some of the literati about them, of course, but they're out to make money, and they pick up books that sell, and they do not have time to spend with gummy, fuzzy-minded authors, only to accept their work, sell their books, pay them a royalty. Yes, publishers are crusty. Greenberg turned down A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. They make some terrific mistakes. He also turned down How to Win Friends and Influence People. So there you go. They think they're smart. The Waters girl, the colored girl who wrote His Eyes on the Sparrow. 3 or 4 publishers rejected that, turned it down. But the one that picked it up has made $500,000 out of it, and I suppose will make considerable more, and the author, of course, has made money from it. So they say that the publishing business is a terrific gamble, and I believe it is. You do not know what the public wants to read. You just have to take the chance, putting out something, and somehow or other, now and then, it'll catch on. Any other question? Yes. No, I did not. I'm not much of a short story writer. They say that in writing a short story, you have to be so compact, so tight, as it were, that you just strain words, almost. And from reading some of them, I'm inclined to that belief. Well, if you're writing a novel, you're able to sprawl, as it were. And I like that sprawling. So I haven't tried short stories. Have you? Well, you hope to, some of these days. Or you hope to try a novel, don't you? Well, sure. All right, very well. About 6 months each time. Now, I'm not saying that I could not have rewritten it in 6 weeks. Had I had 6 weeks working time. But after all, when you have a heavy law practice, to have clients paying you for your time, your first obligation is to that clientele. And you must look after their business if you're going to stay in the law business. And if you're able to get 2 hours tonight at writing, that's one thing. If you're not able to get that 2 hours,